Here we are again. I'm so glad you came to class today. I'm Menopause Barbie, the gynecologist who's on a mission to give all women the menopause education they deserve. Can you believe that despite the fact that women have routinely lived past the age of menopause since the year 1900, I'm the first and only person to ever actually provide an education on menopause for you? That's just horrible. It's so unfair to women. You deserve much, much more. So I'm just doing my best to ensure that you know absolutely everything you need to know in order to succeed in managing your menopause your way. So this is video number 421. It's part of our big unit on epithelial ovarian cancer. Here's what we've covered thus far in the unit. I'm telling you this because you'll need to know in order to appreciate the lesson today. I started out with video number 413 teaching you about the 4 organs of your reproductive tract. Video 414 zeroed in on your ovaries as egg and hormone factories. Video number 415 depicted the life cycle of your ovaries. Video number 416 was on the internal anatomy of your ovaries. In that video, you learned that there are 3 cell types that comprise your ovaries. Video number 417 presented the various swellings that can develop in your ovaries. Video number 418 presented the 3 origins of the many different kinds of ovarian cancer. Video number 419 addressed the ovarian cancers that derive from the outer epithelial layer of your ovaries. These are the most common and most deadly of all. And you learned that serous epithelial ovarian cancer is the specific kind of epithelial ovarian cancer that we all worry about the most. So in video number 420, I presented the serious statistics for serous epithelial ovarian cancer. And now it's time for you to start learning about the risk factors for ovarian cancers. So that's what we'll address today. In my book, both the first and the second edition, you'll find a section on risk factors for ovarian cancer in chapter 32. But in this video, I'm going to bring things to your attention that are not included in my book. Now, I've told you over and over again that this YouTube channel is really a school. And because it's a school, I present everything in order to ensure you're understanding exactly the way your teachers did when you were back in school. So if you've been watching all my videos in order, you've seen that there is a list of risk factors for every disease. Risk factors are the things that can contribute to increasing your risk for a disease. A risk factor does not typically qualify as the cause of a disease. More commonly, a risk factor merely increases the chance that you'll get the disease. And the more risk factors you have, the greater the chance you'll get the disease. For all the other diseases we've covered, the lists of risk factors have been pretty straightforward. There's just one list for each disease. But for ovarian cancers, it's not that simple. Instead of having just one straightforward list of risk factors for all the various kinds of epithelial ovarian cancer, there are different risk factors for different kinds of epithelial ovarian cancers. This is why I told you in video 419 that research on ovarian cancers does not distinguish one kind of cancer from another. And the result is that while we know there are some differences in risk factors, that knowledge is fuzzy. When researchers think they are studying only one kind of epithelial ovarian cancer, but are really studying more than one kind, it skews the information we get. And that's the case with these different risk factors for different kinds of epithelial ovarian cancers. I always want you to know the limitations of everything, including research and the knowledge it gives us. And for epithelial ovarian cancers, the research is limited. So the knowledge about the different kinds of epithelial ovarian cancers is limited also. So let's begin our discussion of risk factors. First, we need to review the 4 different kinds of epithelial ovarian cancers. You might recall this chart from previous tutorials. Focus on the last column. There you see the 4 different kinds of epithelial ovarian cancers: serous, endometrioid, clear cell, and mucinous. Some risk factors increase your risk for all of these. Others increase your risk for only one of these. So this video is an overview of the risk factors for these various epithelial ovarian cancers overall. Today, we'll list the risk factors generally. Then, in upcoming videos, I'll address each risk factor individually and designate whether each pertains to only certain kinds of epithelial ovarian cancer or all epithelial ovarian cancers, whenever it's pertinent. Of course, we're going to create a chart of the risk factors. I'll start by presenting each category separately and add them one by one to create a chart bearing all the risk factors. Okay, the risk factors for epithelial ovarian cancers fall into 2 broad classifications: hereditary and non-hereditary. The hereditary risk factors consist of genetic mutations that increase your risk for epithelial ovarian cancer. And there are different categories for the various genetic mutations that can increase your risk for epithelial ovarian cancers. The non-hereditary risk factors consist of non-genetic factors that increase your risk for epithelial ovarian cancers. But the non-hereditary classification also has different categories of risk factors that include personal history, family history, personal profile factors including age, race, ethnicity, and height, reproductive and hormonal factors, lifestyle factors, inflammatory factors, and psychological factors. So let's talk a bit about each category in very general terms today. The hereditary risk factors are first. A hereditary risk for epithelial ovarian cancer is due to a genetic mutation. And they are first on the list because by far they are the most significant of all in terms of the strength of their effect on your risk for epithelial ovarian cancer. But they are not significant in terms of the percentage of epithelial ovarian cancers overall. There are many different genetic mutations that can increase your risk for epithelial ovarian cancer, but they do not all increase it to the same degree. And while we tend to think of epithelial ovarian cancer as a genetic disease, only 20% of them are associated with any kind of genetic mutation. And that's not all. There are actually different degrees of risk conferred by different genetic mutations. They are divided into high risk, moderate risk, and low risk. But even though we are aware of these different genetic mutations, we do not have a lot of knowledge on most of them. This is the case for 2 reasons. The first reason is that epithelial ovarian cancer is not a common disease. So the opportunity to study it is not readily available. The second reason is that instead of studying these genetic mutations separately, researchers commonly just lump them all together. Some of these mutations are the same mutations that increase your risk for breast cancer. Those are the ones about which we know the most. But many others are not pertinent to breast cancer. And since breast cancer gets so much attention, while epithelial ovarian cancer gets so little attention, there are huge gaps in our knowledge on epithelial ovarian cancer. So we'll begin our chart of risk factors with the hereditary factors. Here you see the beginning of our chart. In the first column, I've designated the broad group of hereditary risk factors for epithelial ovarian cancer. The second column shows you the 3 categories of genetic mutations for epithelial ovarian cancer: hereditary breast ovarian cancer syndrome, hereditary site-specific ovarian cancer syndrome, and hereditary non-polyposis colon cancer syndrome, or Lynch syndrome. The third column designates the percentage contribution of each category to epithelial ovarian cancers. The fourth column lists the individual genetic mutations. We'll be talking about them in a separate video. Today's video is for purposes of giving you the big picture of the risk factors, not for delving into them individually. I always tell you the scope of material in my videos because inevitably I get comments asking me why I didn't tell you more about something. Of course, these comments always come from people who just watched a video randomly with no idea that my channel is really a school that gives you a real education. I think some people are used to expecting an entire education on a subject in a 15-minute video. It's absurd when you stop and think about it. But that's what a quick fix world would lead people to expect. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. Here's the chart again. The fifth column designates the degree to which each risk factor increases your risk over that of the general population. We call this relative risk, and I taught you all about it in previous videos. Now we move on to your personal history as a risk factor for epithelial ovarian cancer. Personal history refers to particular diseases which you yourself have had previously and that can increase your risk for epithelial ovarian cancer. Some of these are other cancers, some are not. When it comes to diseases that increase your risk of epithelial ovarian cancer, there are 3 categories: previous ovarian cancer of any kind, previous breast cancer of any kind, and previous endometriosis. Now we'll add that category of risk factors to our chart, and we'll discuss them all later in future videos. Now I've created the second classification of risk factors in that first column. These are the non-hereditary risk factors. And I've designated the category of personal history of non-hereditary risk factors in the second column. Notice that the third column for percent contribution to epithelial ovarian cancers is blank. That's because we don't know how much this category contributes. This is one of the problems with epithelial ovarian cancer. There are many unknowns. In the fourth column, I've simply listed the 3 diseases that can increase your risk of epithelial ovarian cancer: previous ovarian cancer, previous breast cancer, and endometriosis. And notice once again that I have not indicated the degree to which each of these increases your risk of epithelial ovarian cancer, which is called relative risk, because this is yet another unknown. All right, now it's time for family history. This is the one that everyone seems to overemphasize. Not only does family history contribute to only a very small percentage of epithelial ovarian cancers, it also increases your risk only a tiny, tiny bit. It constitutes 10% of epithelial ovarian cancers overall, and it increases your risk by only 5%. The family members who contribute to your risk of one disease may be different from the family members who contribute to some other disease. You absolutely have to know which ones to consider for each disease. This is an area in which women commonly worry about all the wrong relatives. The family members who contribute to your risk of breast cancer and the family members who contribute to your risk of epithelial ovarian cancer are not the same. For epithelial ovarian cancer, both your maternal and your paternal relatives matter for increasing your risk. But for breast cancer, only your maternal relatives increase your risk. You learned that in the breast cancer unit that preceded this one. And for certain kinds of ovarian cancer, not necessarily epithelial in origin, both your first and second degree relatives matter for increasing your risk. But that just depends on the particular kind of origin of the ovarian cancer. And this is also in contrast to breast cancer, in which only your first degree maternal relatives increase your risk. Unfortunately, most women make the mistake of assuming that all relatives have an impact on their risk of epithelial ovarian cancer and breast cancer. They don't. If women focused as much on their own lifestyles and personal situations as they do on family situations, they'd be a lot more likely to decrease the risk of epithelial ovarian cancer. So let's add this to our chart. Our next factor is personal profile. Personal profile consists of your demographic features that can increase your risk of epithelial ovarian cancer. For purposes of this particular disease, it includes age, race, ethnicity, and height. In other words, your age affects your risk of different kinds of ovarian cancers. Some ovarian cancers occur more in young women. Other ovarian cancers occur more in older women. Epithelial ovarian cancer is one that occurs mostly in older women. Likewise, certain racial and ethnic groups are more prone to epithelial ovarian cancer than others. The most significant of these is Ashkenazi Jewish ethnicity, and I'll address these details in a later video. Another somewhat unusual personal profile feature having an effect on your risk for epithelial ovarian cancer is your height. Go figure. So in a later video, you'll discover what it is about your height that matters. For now, we'll just put these things on our chart. Once again, it is not my intention to give you details today. Here's personal profile on our chart. Now I've added personal profile as a category of risk factors, and I've divided it into the 4 specific risk factors of age, race, ethnicity, and height. The statistics for degree of contribution and for relative risk are unknowns. Next, we have a biggie. It's the reproductive and hormonal factors that increase your risk of epithelial ovarian cancer. In the unit on breast cancer, you learned that your reproductive history had a significant effect on your risk of breast cancer. And the very same thing is true for epithelial ovarian cancer. And there is complete overlap of all the reproductive risk factors for these 2 cancers. So just as you saw for breast cancer, the risk factors for epithelial ovarian cancer are as follows: early menarche, late post-menopause, few or no pregnancies, and little or no breastfeeding. All of these contribute to your menstrual life, which is the number of menstrual cycles you've had in your lifetime. The more menstrual cycles you've had, the higher your risk. And while not stated as a risk factor for breast cancer, infertility is a specifically designated risk factor for epithelial ovarian cancer, and so is the use of infertility drugs. But both infertility and use of infertility drugs are really the same thing as having a lot of menstrual cycles and not having a lot of pregnancies or months of breastfeeding. The last factor in this category of reproductive and hormonal factors is a questionable one. Some lists of risk factors for epithelial ovarian cancer include hormone replacement therapy as a risk factor, HRT. Others do not. We'll address this in great detail in a later video when you'll learn that taking birth control pills definitely and profoundly decreases your risk for epithelial ovarian cancer. So declaring that higher dosage birth control decreases your risk, but lower dosage HRT increases your risk will leave you scratching your head. Here's this category of risk factors on our chart. So here's the reproductive and hormonal category of risk factors, but without degree of contribution or relative risk. See how many gaps there are in our knowledge about this disease? Moving on to lifestyle as a risk factor for epithelial ovarian cancer. In every single unit on every single disease, you've seen that your lifestyle contributes heavily to your risk for each disease. The precise lifestyle factors that increase your risk vary from one disease to the next, and the degree to which different lifestyle factors increase your risk varies from one disease to the next. But there is always a lifestyle category of risk factors. For epithelial ovarian cancer, the lifestyle risk factors include dietary fat, alcohol, smoking, sedentary lifestyle, and obesity. And I'll dedicate a separate video to how these various lifestyle factors affect your risk for epithelial ovarian cancer. Here's our chart with lifestyle added to the categories of risk factors. And once again, we have no data on degree of contribution or relative risk. Our next risk factor for epithelial ovarian cancer is the inflammatory factors. These are things that cause inflammation in a way that increases your risk. You know, it's not common to see inflammation as a separate category of risk factors for a disease, but it is considered pertinent here. There are three categories of inflammation that can increase your risk of epithelial ovarian cancer: endometriosis, talcum powder in your genital region, and pelvic inflammatory disease, also known as PID. You encountered indirect references to inflammation as a risk factor in the heart attack and Alzheimer's units too. So inflammation as a risk factor really isn't unique to epithelial ovarian cancer, but this is the first time we've seen it actually listed as a separate and distinct category on a chart of risk factors. Here's our chart with the inclusion of the inflammatory risk factors. There you see inflammation at the bottom in red. Notice that endometriosis is the only inflammatory risk factor for which we actually have relative risk, to designate how much it increases your risk over the average risk. And the reason we have that figure is because there is more research on endometriosis than there is on epithelial ovarian cancer. So there's been more opportunity to designate this value. Finally, we have the psychological category of risk factors. It probably seems odd to you that psychological things can actually increase your risk for something as serious as epithelial ovarian cancer. But psychological factors are actually pretty impactful for most diseases. We just don't acknowledge them as such. Specifically, stress and depression increase your risk for epithelial ovarian cancer. And later I'll devote a separate video to what we know about them. So here's our complete chart of risk factors for epithelial ovarian cancer. And even though the psychological category of risk factors seems less significant than some of the others, just look at the degree of increased risk it imposes in the column for relative risk. It's a shockingly high 6 to 20% for stress and 30% for depression. As you look at this chart, notice just how much it overlaps with what you learned in the unit on breast cancer. If you hold the lists of risk factors for the two side by side, they are practically mirror images of one another. Of course, this screen is too small and these lists are too broad to actually place them side by side, so we're going to look at them separately first. Here's the list of risk factors for breast cancer. You've seen it many times if you've been watching my videos in order. Now, if I modify the two charts for breast cancer and epithelial ovarian cancer and superimpose them onto a single chart, you can easily see the overlap. As you look at this chart, start with the middle column. That middle column designates the different categories of risk factors for breast cancer and epithelial ovarian cancer. Breast cancer is on the left side of the middle column. Epithelial ovarian cancer is on the right side of the middle column. Notice that all the categories are the same except for dense breasts as a category for breast cancer, and inflammatory and psychological factors as categories for epithelial ovarian cancer. Next, look at the two outermost columns on the far left and far right. These list the individual risk factors for each category. Notice that they are practically mirror images of one another all the way down to the turquoise row for dense breasts. Finally, look at the two columns flanking the middle column. For the few specifics listed, notice that they are strikingly similar overall. Throughout this unit on epithelial ovarian cancer, you are going to see these similarities between it and breast cancer. So if you're interested in one, you'll be interested in the other. I like giving you an overview before delving into the nitty-gritty details. I think it piques your interest and provides a good framework for your education. As you can see, many different things contribute to your risk for epithelial ovarian cancer. And knowing what increases your risk always helps you to know how to decrease your risk. This is true even for those risk factors over which you have no control. So in the upcoming videos, I'll go through these one by one and school you on each category of risk factors individually. After that, I'll teach you how to decrease your risk for epithelial ovarian cancer. The three charts are your summary. The chart of risk factors for epithelial ovarian cancer, the chart of risk factors for breast cancer, and the chart comparing the risk factors for both cancers. And you can find these charts via the link in the description box just below this screen. Alternatively, you can go to menopausetailor.me. going to menopausetailor.me is the better option by far. You'll find all sorts of things there. Fun and informative articles I've written about menopause, a whole store of menopause education resources, and best of all, an opportunity to schedule a consultation to tailor everything specifically to you. You don't have to go anywhere to subscribe to this channel and my newsletter. You do have to go elsewhere to follow me. You have to go to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Stories, and TikTok. And you definitely should come back here in a week to learn about hereditary versus non-hereditary epithelial ovarian cancer. Bye, my dears.